Okay, I think let's get started. We are at 3 p.m. UK, 4 p.m. Central Eastern Time, and let's get started with today's webinar, which is going to be between Virtuoso and Mostly.ai on how to automate test data generation to save time, money, and headaches, which I don't know about you, but I always like if I can take away a headache whilst saving time and money. So very quickly, today we're going to be running this webinar with myself, James Bent. I am from Virtuoso. I'm VP of Solutions Engineering. I'm not going to read out all that blurb on the screen, but rest assured, I've been here just about long enough to be able to talk about how Virtuoso can empower your automated testing of browser-based applications. And I'm very pleased to welcome alongside me Mario Scriminacci, who's from Mostly.ai. Mario, I will let you do an introduction to yourself. Thank you very much.
Hi, James. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Mario Scriminacci, Chief Product Officer of Mostly.ai. And today, as James said, we are going to see how we can actually automate the whole pipeline from data generation and test automation. Of course, Mostly.ai is dedicated to this data generation, and this is how we actually provide good quality, relevant quality synthetic data. We are going to see in a while. So please, James. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Mario. So yeah, let's jump straight into it. So today's agenda, we are going to be looking at what are the current challenges around test data. We're going to be giving an introduction to synthetic data, which will then lead us nicely to demonstrating with Mario's help here how Mostly.ai takes data and synthesizes it for use in testing. We're going to show you how live you can produce synthesized data. In this case, we're going to be creating a CSV file to then use in Virtuoso's test automation. And then we'll be showing you how Virtuoso can run tests using that synthetic data. And then, of course, we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. So that first point, the current challenges with test data. So if there is one reason why test automation projects fail, it is because of test data. We see this a lot where where we're being used by clients who are heavily dependent on data within different environments. And the reason for that is whether not paying enough attention to, or because of things like the complexity of environments, of data, of workflows. There's typically not enough test data. You might have a couple of data scenarios, go through a couple of runs, you burn through it. Radioactive production data. So trying to utilize anything in production back in testing environments is typically a recipe for not a very good outcome. But then equally, meaningless mock data, everything being a John Smith or a John Doe or whatever, and this is what Mario is really going to talk about, the power of synthetic data to really give you meaningful mock data. But also the fact that, why would you use a platform? Because you have limits. If you're trying to do this manually, trying to manually generate data, it's difficult, it's laborious, it takes time, which then leads us into the final challenge when it comes to data, which is speed, 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 which I think it's fair to say everybody is looking to do things as fast as possible while still retaining quality in what they're doing. So what is AI-generated synthetic data? And actually, Mario, I might hand across to yourself to just introduce us. What do we mean by AI-generated synthetic data, please?
Thanks, James, and thanks for setting the scene about the problem of data. And as you mentioned, speed is one of the biggest problem, right? Data shows that 50% of the time in the world, test automation is actually focused on generating data or getting data, right? And sometimes people think about synthetic data in the classical and, let me say, legacy way of seeing it. So tools that thanks to rule systems or even script data, even your Excel, you basically generate samples of what you believe is a proper distribution. So you spend time in doing it. The kind of synthetic data we generate is another race, in another species, right? Is what we call the AI-generated synthetic data, smarter synthetic data. So we actually learn from real production data. So we basically our sample base. We learn the patterns, the structures, and we produce, thanks to our generative AI model, what is highly realistic data sets, both in statistical properties, business rules, referential integrity, so on and so forth. We are going to see with the demo how easy it is actually to point to a data source and let the AI do the works, understanding the structure, understanding the rules. So you don't need to specify any business rule in it, but just plug in your data pipeline. You can decide to do it in a completely automated way. This is the goal, of course, of having testing automation. But you will have, and we are going to see a UI when you can actually do everything with no code. And in reality, if you are generating synthetic data in the legacy way, the quality is not near there, is not enough. But even the open source alternatives, like in the AI generated space, are not closer to us in terms of quality and in terms of speed of data generation. So if we go to the next slide, you can see how actually synthetic data is a much smarter way to generate data for testing for several reasons. The first one, you can actually automate the data generation. So you can select what is your data source, decide what is the type of data you want to synthesize, and having your data destination what you need, a proper data set with proper distribution. You don't need to specify any business rule. The AI will take the pattern for you. It will learn what are the correlation between the parameters, what are the parameters that make sense or not, and use them in the proper way. And we are going to see in our quality assurance report what I mean by it. Is privacy secured by default? So 100% anonymity is guaranteed in the process and is completely automated. We not only have different mechanisms to ensure the privacy of the data set, but we also have rigorous tests at the end of it to be sure that what we are generating is 100% secure to be used and to be shared inside your organization. So what we are producing, what we like to call it, is GDPR free. You don't have to care about GDPR anymore, because it's impossible to have one-to-one re-identification with the original data set. But at the same time, you have customers and customer action, transaction events that will look like the production ones. So you can even cover more test cases. One of the cool things about the generative AI, if you ever seen, for example, AI generation of images, is that you can program it. So you can ask the AI to actually generate more edge cases. So starting from the proper outliers to the production, you can generate edge cases and have more reliability at the end of the day of your application, because you are testing more extremes. And finally, you can create as much data as you need. So you can ask, and we are going to see that today, for example, to generate a subset of the data with the proper distribution, or even generate more data, like 2 times, 10 times more data for example, load testing or performance testing. So you can actually have a proper distribution of your customers with proper transaction events without actually scaling your production traffic that will not eat the right caches, because it's just replicated traffic. So how easy it is to generate synthetic data? In the next slide, James, we can see that is very straightforward. You connect to your database, define what are the tables you want to protect, so what are the entities that might contain PII. You start synthesization and you set the synthetic data. And you can share within your organization, right to a downstream, for example, a pre-production database or developer database very easily. So that's it. This is how easy it is to actually generate synthetic data. And once you have synthetic data, James, what will happen on your side?
I actually take myself off mute, I can tell. Yeah, so that's a great point. And so for what we're going to show you today is sort of in the scope of using Mostly AI to generate some test data, which will load into Virtuoso. That's one scenario, but bear in mind, you could be loading from Mostly into your environments, and then Virtuoso is testing those environments. But for Virtuoso, where we are a codeless test automation platform for functional end-to-end and integration tests for web applications, we're going to show how easy it is to generate your functional UI and integration tests that leverages test data. We're going to be doing it directly from some data that Mario will be generating, some synthetic data, to use that within our tests. But equally, this could be without you even having to think about data in the environments or making sure it's set up with realistic synthetic data. Use Mostly.ai to seed the environment and then just let Virtuoso test it without either burning it down or having risk around using, actual production data. And so what we're actually going to show from the Virtuoso side, after Mario takes us through and actually shows you how to generate synthetic data in Mostly.ai, we're going to show you how easy it is to create functional UI and integration tests for multiple browser-based applications using natural language. We're going to show you how we can easily take that synthetic test data from Mostly.ai and data drive our tests, including making API calls in conjunction with the functional tests, which can get or seed data. We're going to show you how we can use environments, and then you're going to get that real experience of live authoring with natural language. We're going to write a test in front of your eyes and then talk about how we use AI and machine learning for self-healing to automatically maintain dynamic changes. And then finally, how you report and debug your tests. Sounds like a lot, but actually being codeless and straightforward, this should be straightforward. And really, without further ado, best thing you can do when you get on any sort of demo or webinar is to show exactly what we're talking about. So to that end, and actually, there you go. It'd be good if you know your slides as well, that we'll also be talking about some of the benefits of Virtuoso, which from a testing perspective is reducing maintenance effort, typically by up to 90% from the maintenance and self-healing, accelerating your test automation adoption using natural language, but also in conjunction with having environments that have realistic synthetic data already set up, and then scalable automation, enabling anybody to test against any browser-based application or integrations. That's really the benefits from the Virtuoso side. And from that point, now we get on to the demo. And to that front, Mario, I'm going to let you grab the screen off of me, bring up Mostly, and let's take a look from the Mostly side on generating some synthetic data.
Can you see my screen, James? That's just to be sure that I'm
I
sharing
can
the
see
right
that.
thing.
Thank you, Mario. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see how actually it's easy to generate synthetic data with some click of a buttons. Typically, the first thing you have to do is to define what are your data sources. We call data sources data connector in our platform, and we support different types of data sources. You can have your local server, you can upload your Parquet files, CSV files there, but you can also connect to the cloud, for example, to some cloud storages for your data lake. It could be AWS, Azure, or GCP, or we support 5 different types of database, and we are adding more integration every release that we do. Be aware that right now I'm using the free version of Mostly.ai, that you can go to Mostly.ai and subscribe to use your free version, and you can start synthesization right away. In the free version, we made support for MySQL and Postgre, but we also support SQL Server, DB2, and Oracle databases. Once you define your data source, you can actually test the connectivity pretty easy, and you can do the next step of the data synthesization, that is create the data catalog. Creating the data catalog is also pretty straightforward. You can simply connect to a database, for example, my data source. The system will actually load automatically all the tables and all in the schema of the database. I will not do it now because I already create one example here, and you will see and the system will actually understand what is the schema and connect all the tables together and actually suggest what is the best synthesization strategy for your database. So really automation is a first step for everything we do. Of course, you can check what are the types of synthesization strategies that you want to do and see how the outcome will be. So for example, you can change the synthesization style. We have different data types that we support. For example, categorical value, also daytime, numerical value, geolocation, text, and character sequence, but we support also mock data if there are columns that you are not interested in having the proper distribution, because those are emails and stuff that you want to manage through the AI. But let's jump to the case that we have today. Today, we are going to synthesize a CSV, and synthesizing a CSV is pretty straightforward. You can start a job selecting the file that you want to upload. By the way, this is a file that we provide in our tutorial. So whatever I'm doing today right now, you can sign up to the free version of Mostly.ai and just run it the same way and see the results by yourself. This is a CRM table with information about the customers. If I upload the file, the system will actually understand what are the best synthesization parameters for this file. And the only thing I have to specify is how many subjects I want. As I mentioned before, I can learn from the real data, but ask the AI to generate more or less subjects. For the demo today, I'm going to generate just 250 customers, so I can pass the CSV file to James and see what are the results. So I can launch the job, and the moment I launch the job, I will actually monitor whatever is happening. And we were going to see how quickly real time is actually synthesization of a file with all the customer information in the CRM table. Looking at this, let me just show you, for example, I will see the results of these files at the end of it, but let me show what is the type of checks and quality measurement that we do. This is the same identical file without any downsampling. And in this box, you can actually see the accuracy. So we are comparing the generated data with the original one. And you can see with a green mark, okay, the accuracy is very high, you can actually use it. And we also have what we call the privacy checks. We have 3 different measures. If you are interested, you can go to our website and check what are the type of privacy checks that we do at the end of the data. But in reality, you have a full report that is detailed on all the different columns and correlation. So for example, here in our data set, we have first name and last name, birth date, and gender information. You can see in the green line how is the synthetic data distribution for the birth date, and in the gray line what is the one of the original data. And you can see how actually close the synthetic data set is within the original data set. And you can also check the correlation between all the different columns, even having pairwise comparison for all the columns of your data set. This is a very simple one, just few columns, but we are able to synthesize entire databases with the proper distribution and so on and so forth, and we can respect correlation between all the columns in the data set. So by now, my job should be finished. As we mentioned, very quick, just 15 seconds. We learned from 23,000 subjects, and we generated 250 of them with privacy checks is green, the accuracy is green. So I can pass the ball to James and the file in this case to continue the testing automation experience with Virtuoso.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mario. And, I love this, the sort of the control you have, whether it's you say databases or data sources, and being able to set the parameters and sort of do large data sets, small data sets, and it's all, like our SaaS platform, really easy to use. So incredibly impressive from that side of things. And yeah, so then if we jump into Virtuoso, which I am showing on screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that test data file that Mario generated for us with the 250 rows of personal data, which has been synthesized. And we're going to put that into an e-commerce store. Quite a simple journey, but bear in mind for Virtuoso, we are used for testing on things like Salesforce or SAP for S/4HANA, business systems that are heavily dependent on very rich data that you might want to be synthesizing from a production environment to be able to test through. So number one, in Virtuoso, we do enable you in a SaaS platform to start doing functional UI and integration testing using natural language, where I've started this one up to navigate to a URL, which is our testing Rocket Shop e-commerce site. I have a live browser window in the platform. And what I'm going to do is first set up my test data, which then I'm going to use when I write my functional test. So to do that, we have a test data portion of the platform where I could generate test data, which I'm going to drag and drop the CSV file that Maria had generated, which has, let's call it this is our mostly data. And when I do that, it immediately imports from the CSV file all of the columns as our variables with the headers. And then we've got 250 rows of synthesized data, which looks pretty realistic to me. So with that done, we now have a data source. And bear in mind, you could actually be doing this where one is to load them into Virtuoso, but you could actually, like Mario said, be loading this into your database, which is then pulled into the environment, and Virtuoso tests against that. So you don't have to worry about data setup. But what we're going to do then is come back to our test, and we're going to assign a data table. So we're going to manage our test data and assign the mostly data. So this is our data table with the variables. So I'm going to save that. And what this is going to enable me to do is when I start writing my functional test, which I'm going to start by adding a product into the basket. Firstly, we're going to demonstrate to you that with Virtuoso, it's literally, you can just start writing tests immediately by using natural language commands. So here I'm just going to put in a dynamic wait to wait for Rocket Shop merchandise, something unique on the page, which then says either wait 20 seconds or Rocket Shop merchandise to load. It's a dynamic wait time. You might do that every time the page changes state. We're then going to say look for Comet integration. The reason I'm doing this is because the next thing I want to do is click add to bag, and there are multiples of those. So I'm saying look for Comet integration to give context as to which add to bag I want to click, which then I could just say click add to bag. So I am simply writing a natural language. I don't have to set up keywords or elements. I don't have to know selectors. I'm just what I see on the screen. I'm using natural language with, in this case, click add to bag. And it goes, and when I write the step, it runs it, clicks on the button, and shows me it's gone green. Next, maybe I want to click on this icon, but I don't know what it's called. So I could go into the dev tools. I could then click on that and see that that icon is called shopping bag. So then I know that if I say click on shopping bag, I can interact with that even though I didn't know what it was called based on the UI. So now we're into the summary. So let's just say now wait for, let's go to checkout because we've moved page. And then I'm just going to simply click on go to checkout, which is going to take me into the checkout. So now we're into the checkout page where we can start saying, great, I've got a form that I have to enter some data into. So doing that, let's go the checkout form. And what I want to do here is I want to use some of my test data, which, this is a relatively straightforward set we're using. So we've got a first name, last name. That's what I'm interested in. Now here, I've got the variables, first name, last name, except it's asking me for the full name here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to store the value, which is going to be my first name with the underscore there, plus I'm just going to put a space in the middle of those, plus then I'm going to have the last name, and I'm going to store that into a variable. So we're going to call that full name. And so what I'm doing is just building this into using that test data to build into a full name. And so you can see here, what I've actually done is I've pulled in, because I've got my test data, I've pulled in the first row, Ernest Espinosa. I've pulled those in from the two variables, and now I've built myself a name using that synthetic data, which then I can go through and say, write my full name into the full name field, just by using, again, what I see on the screen. And again, it goes ahead and does that, shows me that it's working. Great, I know I've got working automation. Now, just bear in mind here, you can actually interact with the screen as well. So I could hover over confirm and pay, right click and say, click on this element, and it writes the step for me. It even tells me if I've done something wrong. So I might say, click on confirm and pay and just spell it terribly badly. It tries to run it. It's going to break. Then it's going to allow me to fix this. There we go. So I could fix step and then go and click on this. It just means you're getting always immediate feedback, even where I'm data driving this with synthetic data, which I didn't have before. I didn't have to really set this up because of the benefit of Mostly. It just means you can really create quick and easy, in this case, functional UI testing steps. But then bear in mind as well, I could be doing API testing in conjunction with both my synthetic data and the functional UI steps. So what I'm going to do now is I've set up an API call to create a user, which is going to use that variable, the full name, which was generated from the synthetic data set. Basically, I'm going to use the test data from the functional UI with the synthetic data set and pass it through an API call. And I do that by coming in and simply saying in my functional test, I'm going to say API. I want to use the create user call. So let's scroll down here. There we go. And then that's going to return a response. And so now what that does is, because I've already mapped in the inputs, which includes my full name, which is defined here from the synthetic data, I will make that call, which uses, as you can see, Ernest Espinosa, which is being passed through and returns a response, which I could be asserting again. So assert that response.result.id, for example, again, if I can type, is greater than 1, for example. So I can be performing assertions, whether it's on an API call, whether it's my functional UI steps. You can see how fast it is to build a data-driven journey using synthetic data inclusive of API calls. It's really, really powerful stuff. But remember what Mario did for us. He generated 250 rows of test data. So what I want to do now, I want to data drive this test in parallel. It's really easy for me to do that. I can simply come in, execute advanced, and run it with test data. I'm doing this in the UI. I could do it with scheduled plans. I could do it from CI/CD pipeline tools. When I run this, then we're going to automatically launch and try and run. We can see 250 tests with the data, run those in parallel. You can control that parallelism, where these will start firing up, running immediately in a headless Chrome browser. And you can see when we get down to these steps here, in this case, I'm using, if I click here, we've got Ernest Espinosa. This one, we've got James Newen, which maps to the second row of data from the test data, and so on. We're going to be going through each of our scenarios using that synthetic data. Again, we've got a pretty simple example here, but you could build out and you could see actually you could have all of your data elements being data-driven with synthetic data in this case. Now, adding into that with Virtuoso, the way that we are actually working is when you're writing the tests, we're looking in the DOM level to discover all available element selectors automatically. So we're automatically building the model of the elements, even for those fields, let's say the form fields that are using the synthetic data in those. And then where you have any changes, dynamic elements within your environments, you could have elements that have dynamic IDs or changing XPaths, even where you want to, let's say, click on a data record, then we're using AI and machine learning to automatically self-heal tests, which means that every time you run these, even where you're running through each of those 250 scenarios, every time this runs, we are automatically looking on each and every step to see if there are changes, whether in the element through the selectors, or it could be the labels. So long as our algorithms can intelligently identify that it's the same element, we automatically heal that as the test is running. So hopefully you can start to build a picture here. Not only does Mostly with Virtuoso help you reduce down that burden of managing data in your environments, where you can absolutely test in Virtuoso against different environments by mapping in environment parameters, which could also be drawing from the synthetic data. You've got that speed to author robust tests that are going to work because you've got the live authoring validation. You can launch in parallel driving with synthetic data scenarios, but then also you've got this self-healing to make sure you don't have to fix flakiness. And then on top of it all, being able to report out and drill through and say where I have my test data that I'm running, then I can report on each and every single one of those tests. I can go into the project activity, view the test reports. You can see that we're almost about 159 have already been executed just in the time we've been sitting here. And remember, we built that test live. But if there were failures, for instance, we have here, for example, then you're able to drill into each and every single individual case, see when it was run, which environment, who ran it, and you can see if there are test failures. In this case, we didn't define test data to pass in. But if it were an issue, I could be looking at our root cause analysis, getting the page source, the page network, and page console log for every execution. I could even go through as an engineer and rerun this, or it could be an SDED, anybody to say, I want to repeat this and go through step by step to see actually what are the issues, and I can debug live using the dev tools, for instance, looking at the network as I step through this. So we've covered quite a lot, I think, Mario, between Mostly.ai with synthetic data and then Virtuoso for how we cover test automation for functional UI and integration testing of browser apps using that synthetic data. Hopefully that's been very rich for everybody attending the webinar. What I will do is fire up these slides again, because now's the time, as we have there, to see if there are any questions and answers. And we might ask our handy Ryan Thornton in the corner there. Ryan, is there anything behind the scenes where we're seeing some questions come in at all?
Yeah, hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to the Q&A session. We do have a few in. The first one, I'm going to group two together because it's, can I run on different environments, which I think we touched at the end, and how would I implement this in my different environments?
Yeah, so from the Virtuoso side, as we showed, yes, you can set up the test to, let's say, go into different URLs with different login details. So from us, 100% you can do in different environments. Mario, anything from the Mostly side you want to highlight in terms of going across different environments?
Yes, of course. One of the characteristics of having the agility to write to any possible data destination is our customers sometimes they copy a production database to a different environments like pre-production stage and dev environments. In those environments, they have different synthesization kind of configuration. In the pre-production environment, they want to have a full data set with the same identical distribution and numbers of the production one, but for staging and dev, they prefer to, for example, downsample like we did today together, James. So yeah, definitely we can support it. The idea is actually to generate a synthetic data set, a synthetic database based on the usage of that environment. And having synthetic data will actually give this capability, this adaptability. So definitely support it.
Okay, and I think this one's definitely for Mario. Why should I not just anonymize my data?
The reality that classical anonymization techniques fail for a lot of reasons. Think about the recent scandals on Google, Amazon, and Netflix. The big corporations are failing on anonymizing the dataset properly, not because they are bad or they don't have the capability, but because in reality, the classical data masking and pseudo or de-identification techniques are not safe. It's proven that with just 3 transactions, so imagine that you have customer data and you remove what you think are the PII, like name, family name, email addresses, credit card information, and so on and so forth. But just looking at some events of the customer, like transactional or any events that you are collecting, with just 3 transactions, you actually have like the possibility of identify 60% of the customer base. This is scary. Because now with all the new techniques, AI models, it's very easy to actually identify information. And if Amazon, Google, and Netflix fail doing that properly, imagine how hard it could be to actually do it your database. So the cool thing of generating a new data set from scratch that with an AI that learns from the original data is that you don't have to care about it. Simply is de-identified because there is no one-to-one connection and it's safe to share to use. So do not trust pseudonymization, do not trust the identification data masking, because at the same time you are also destroying information. So imagine that you create a data mask of the information, the PII, you will not be able to use it like in a form like James did with full names and so on and so forth. But imagine that you have more complex data. It would be even crazier on the level of information that you are destroying. So at the end of the day, legacy anonymization like data masking not only is not safe because there is no trade-off between what you're removing and what you need, but at the end of the day, it has a low utility because you are destroying a lot of information there.
Fantastic. Do I still need to maintain test data?
Yeah, so I guess, I might answer that from our experience, which is, if I think about sort of classic scenarios where you have your tests written that also alongside them have the test data defined, where then you find someone, let's say, is trying to use a sales order or a customer They go and do it once, and the next person comes along and they have to then, what do? Recreate test data or go and reset the environment? The answer here is no, because through Mostly AI generating that realistic, randomized synthetic data, then the answer is no, because whether you're putting it into Virtuoso as data entry, as we saw, or whether you're loading into your environments, you're now actually ensuring that your environments aren't just full of, meaningless test data, or worse still, your tests have been written explicitly for certain test data sets which are no longer valid. So the answer there is no, you do not. Although within that, I mean, Mario, I'm sure you agree that actually with platforms such as ours, taking away these sorts of issues, it's actually just realizing now how you use these sorts of mechanisms and platforms to power your testing and what you no longer have to do. There's that transformational aspect.
And actually, the data is, just to add a last piece, it's actually reflecting what's happening in production. So if you have some corner cases that now you have in production, is maybe a risk of having bugs there because it was the unexpected behavior from the users and some information, some form that you didn't manage correctly, you will have those effects align in your lower environment with the automation and run the test in Virtuoso, and it will be out of the box, and new test will fail because you will know automatically what's happening in production and be aligned with the data right away. So actually the data will be maintained, but not from you, but just from the automation automatically.
Okay, got a couple more. This is really interesting. I'm a startup. I have very little data. Is there anything we can do to synthesize my 100 records in a meaningful way?
Of course, a little data can be no data at all, can be 10 records, 100 records, or 1,000 records, right? Now we are used to have the big data versus low data type of analogy, but what is really small data, right? It's important to say that Mostly AI is starting from sample, so we need to have a kind of a starter. It's not that we can invent from scratch data and data distribution, but for example, the minimum amount of subject that you have to provide to the platform is 100. Right, so you can, for example, we cannot guarantee privacy if the number is lower than that, because we cannot learn the proper patterns, right? What we are learning is actually what single users, individuals are doing. So my recommendation is, yes, you can start from little, right? But the definition of little, of course, is not zero. You cannot be from zero. 100 or 1,000 is more recommended, of course. And once you get the minimum, you can actually expand, you can actually upsample your data set and try it out with a lot of different cases combination based on the statistical property of the initial data set. So yes, you can start from little. Little is not zero, is not 1 or 2, is minimum 100. We recommend to start with 1,000 subjects, and then of course you can upsample and do whatever test you want to do.
Good. I've got one last one, just to let everyone know, because I know we've overrun by a little bit. This is being recorded and will be winging its way through to you, which wasn't one of the questions, which is unusual. I've never been on a webinar where somebody didn't ask if it was being recorded, so that's wonderful. We've got a brave new world. Finally, it's I think it's more of a thank you and a nice one to finish on. It says, thank you, I can't believe how many orgs, after decades of being preached to, still use production data in testing, fail because of their data strategy. How can we get this to change? Bit of a philosophical one to end on.
Yeah, and I'm going to turn that into a cheeky commercial one, which is come and talk to Virtuoso and Mostly.ai, and we'll help you do that. But I don't know if that's appropriate to answer, but there you go. I did it that way.
No, for me, the key is automation, right? And the more you create you automate your process, the more you can actually focus on the big deal, the real deal, that is understanding what you want really to test, right? And focusing on what can make your business successful. So the more you automate, the more you go in that direction, the easier it will be even to maintain the process, to adapt to the process, and for example, to fix, like James show us today, what is not working in your infrastructure very easily by looking at the issue that you're finding and focusing on that, make your service better and not understanding how to test it.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, Mario, this has been absolutely brilliant. I will just put up a final slide here, which is a big thank you to both you, Mario, but also everyone who has attended. And there are a couple of links up there to both Virtuoso and Mostly. I do recommend you go and have a look at both the websites. And of course, whether you want to come and have a chat, get a demo, or look at the trials, we're all here and more than happy to have a discussion with you around how you can, empower your testing, but also utilizing synthetic data to drive your test data strategy. So again, thank you, Mario. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, James.
Make the recordings available very shortly on both our websites. Otherwise, for us to say thank you very much. Have a good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. See you again. Thank you.
Bye.